about Frank's biography, but he taught at Warren Wilson for years, a number of other places, and I've known so many graduates from Warren Wilson that say that they majored in Dr. Frank, even if they weren't political science or constitutional studies majors. He was so interesting and so engaging to the student body that people would cross over and take it as an elective. And you'll really see that when you talk. Well, one of the reasons that we love doing this is because we're in such a political climate where people are so polarized, and it's kind of an angry time. But looking back at our roots and where we came from, and the constitutional information about how the country was started and some of the things that we hold dear and true, this kind of gives you a little perspective on some of our founding fathers and what their ideas were, and kind of where we are today. So I hope you enjoy it. If you don't get our newsletter and you'd like to, you can sign up here. If you have a place that you can put one of our posters for the River Music Concert, we'd love to have you put one of those up. And yes.
Did you say that you were going to keep recorded?
Yes, we have. We're recording this now. We've recorded the previous 4, and they're on our webpage. And we put them in our newsletter. And
so we can hear them on the webpage?
Yes. Yeah. And we'll do that with the 5th one as well. And Dr. Frank promises us when we get the book, we have a book signing here. So you can come back and he'll say, you get a star if you attended 3 or more of these lectures.
Or one.
Thank you very much. Our pleasure. Dr. Frank.
Hi, everybody. Well, my students all like it when I begin classes by saying, let us review. On our last meeting, well, we might as well begin at the beginning. We looked at some of the environmental perspectives that people have in America today. Then we looked at the American Constitution in its formal sense as the written document, and saw what are our chances of getting effective policy through that process. And then we looked at the Constitution in its British sense of an unwritten Constitution, our values, our habits, our culture. And that was what we did last time. And this is basically a schematic of that. The argument is, it's certainly not unique to me, that America is the archetypical liberal society. We believe in individualism. We believe in freedom, equality, progress, those things. Now, liberalism has 2 branches. There's one branch that emphasizes reason, and from that reason we derive human rights. So that's rights-based. We call that rights-based or Lockean liberalism. The other strand argues that we're not really rational people. We're basically passionate, emotional people whose passions and emotions get attached to objects that we desire a great deal, and we call those interests. So we have this interest group liberalism and this rights-based liberalism, which basically comprise, I'll leave it up to you, 80–90% of what most Americans believe in. But there's another strand of democratic theory that actually is older. It goes back to the Greeks and Romans, and that's the notion that humans basically form communities. And it's this notion of community and a public interest and a deep fear of corruption that drives this classical Republican or civic humanist trend. On the back of this sheet, I've kind of, can I have one of those? They're all passed out. Oh, they're still going around. You see on the one side some of the major concepts, thank you, of liberalism, and on the other side some of the major concepts of classical republicanism or civic humanism. And if you note, they contradict each other. Logically, these things can't coexist. Well, which of these values do Americans hold? And the answer, of course, is they hold them all. All right. So we are what we sometimes in America call pragmatism is nothing more than the ability to hold contradictory values. What I want to talk about today is, so this is kind of like the abstract version of it. What I want to talk about today is how do these abstract principles actually get embedded and enunciated in America. And there's no better way to do that than to look at the political thought of our three most important founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison. I call this lecture Two Dreams and a Nightmare. The dreams are Jefferson and Hamilton, the nightmare is Madison. This is going to be a very difficult talk to me. This is basically the book. This 3 chapters is what you're going to get tonight. Don't have any idea how I'm going to get through this, but one of the ways I can get through it is to not discuss any of the personal, psychological, or historical aspects of these 3 individual men. This is tough because there's nothing I'd rather do than talk about Jefferson and slavery and Hamilton and his rather unique sexual habits, or Madison. If there's one point.
Wait, his unique sexual habits, and you stop?
Well, or we can also talk about Madison's paranoid hypochondria.
No, let's go back.
If there was one point in American history that I could go back to, I would have loved to have been there when Madison, Hamilton, and Jefferson had dinner together. And the topic was where to locate the new capital. And the 3 of them sat down and discussed and cut a deal that they were located on the Potomac River, close to Virginia, but Virginia didn't want any of its territory cut out. So they would take a chunk of Maryland around this little port city of Georgetown, and that was the deal. That was the deal. In return, Hamilton got Madison, who was Speaker of the House at the time, his consent to have the federal government take over the debts of all the states, assume all the debts of all the states. Why he wanted to do that is a topic for discussion today. All right. So those personal things, let's look at it from a more historic and environmental perspective. All right. Because what's important really for us is not Jefferson, Hamilton, and Madison as individual people. I hope I'm not shocking anybody to tell you they're all dead. What's important is that the legacies they've given us. They're alive today. They live in our perceptions, in our practices, in our written constitution, in our financial system, in the speeches we give. And it's that legacy of Jefferson, Hamilton, and Madison that I want to talk about. If you like, when we get through this, we can have a Q&A and you can ask about it. You can ask about it. I see, this is tough because I can't resist the personal anecdotes. Martha Washington. It was apparently a great lady. Used to spend the winter encampments with her husband, George, went during the Revolutionary War. And Martha had this huge, apparently huge, tremendously oversexed tomcat that she kept as a pet. Guess what the tomcat's name was?
James Madison.
Hamilton. So, that's the wet drum.
It'll be on the test.
Students love it. And I love the collective. Thomas Jefferson. He's been called the American Sphinx for being so difficult to get to and analyze. Most of my education on Jefferson was completely wrong because they taught Jefferson as being a Lockean liberal. That was before political scientists and researchers discovered how deeply embedded this Republican notion is in American thought. Am I talking loud enough? If you the key to understanding Jefferson is to understand Jefferson is America's best example of a classical Republican. Go to Monticello, something I recommend everyone to do. Go into his library, look at what he read, and it's filled with Greeks and Romans histories, the histories of the republics, the Italian republics. Jefferson was deeply steeped in that Republican tradition. He brought it to almost everything he did. And the fundamental difference between Jefferson and the liberals is this: Jefferson's firm, undying belief that human beings, human nature, we do not come into this world as individuals. We are born to be members of communities. It is that community that is the fundamental premise. Jefferson writes early on to his niece, his daughter, I think. He says, "He who made us would have been a pitiful bungler." He repeats this notion of God as the pitiful bungler, which is a bit audacious. If he had made humans unfit for communities. Right? Humans are members of that species. We are members of that species that we call gregarious. We want each other's company. It is no accident that every civilization in the history of the world has considered solitary confinement a form of punishment. It is so for Jefferson. Okay, technology, too much for me. Oh, this is. Here's it is community, which is the fundamental premise of Jefferson, and it's that notion of community which ties into the Republican and not to the liberal tradition. Got it? Now, for Jefferson, of course, the next question is, what holds humans together? Okay? What makes us members of communities? And here, Jefferson links up with another deep tradition. It's called the theory of moral sentiments. Jefferson takes it even deeper. He calls it a moral sense. He says humans are born with a moral sense. Call it what you want. You can call it approbation. You can call it empathy. You can call it compassion. Rousseau called it pity. Jefferson gave it the name that we most commonly give today. He says humans are born with a conscience. Now, are all humans born with a conscience? No. Some are not. All right, but some humans are born without arms and legs. Those are the rare exceptions. Every human is born with this moral sense, this ability to feel empathy and compassion and pity for their fellows. And it is this moral sense, this ethical sense, which holds us together. Note this. This is very important for Jefferson. Ethics is primary for Jefferson. Economics, you could put all of Jefferson's writings on economics in a pamphlet. Very good reason. He didn't understand economics very well, as something Hamilton will discover. But he talks about this moral sense, this ability to know right from wrong. He writes to his daughter, he says, whenever you are about to do any act, ask yourself this question: how would you behave if all the world was watching? And act accordingly. He says, there is something inside of you called your conscience that will make you feel pain when you see suffering, of others, when you're about to do something wrong. That pain is your conscience. Okay? So he links the moral sense to pain and pleasure, and links both to our sense of human community. Got it? Now, like any sense, and he makes this direct parallel to your legs or your arms or anything like that. We're all born with legs and arms. We're not all born great runners. It is possible to exercise the moral sense, just like it's possible to exercise your arms and legs. This is the function of education for Jefferson. Most importantly, this is the function of politics for Jefferson. The function of politics is to exercise our moral sense, to make us stronger community members. Okay? Jefferson said, and this is what education does. It either educates us, babies are born with a strong moral sense, but it doesn't extend any further than themselves. Okay? They have a very strong sense of what's right and wrong, but it only applies to themselves. As you bring up your children, you try to get them to extend that moral sense. Imagine what it's like for your sister when you pull her pigtails. Imagine what it's like. So the moral sense, so the education of the moral sense can either make us more moral, more sensitive, we feel more. Okay? The function of politics, the function of politics is to make us better people. Or the function of, upbringing and education and daily life can numb our senses. Can make us, there's a screen coming down the hall. That's none of our business. The river's being polluted. That's somebody else's concern. We become numb to the pain of others. And for Jefferson, numbness is equal to immorality. Okay? This is important. Ethics are not taught in the sense that they are printed on, when I give this to my students, most students today are raised to believe that values are just socialized, and whatever your society says, if that's right. And I ask them, well, if the people in Germany were socialized to believe in Nazism, did it make it right? I've had students look at me and say, yes, for them. And at that point, it's like, oh my God, why am I in the education business? Well, to help them realize that this moral sense, it applies not only to all Americans, but to all people throughout the world. When Jefferson writes in the Declaration of Independence in the opening, when he says, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that we should declare the causes. So in other words, this revolution that he's about to start, or about to justify, was something that he could appeal to the moral sense of the entire world. This is what the Declaration is trying to do. Look at how much abuse we've taken. Look at why are we doing this? Why are we trying to sever the bonds with England? So we have a moral sense, okay? And we have this notion of corruption where we become more and more numb to other members of our community. Or we have this ability to perfect our moral sense, to become, in fact, better people, more active citizens. How do we perfect the moral sense? We do it by becoming active citizens. Okay? We do it through education. On his tombstone, Jefferson, one of the three most important things he did is he founded the University of Virginia. For moral education of young Virginians. Okay? I must briefly break my promise. One of Jefferson's deepest fears about the institution of slavery was that it numbed the senses. Slavery was bad for Africans, black people, obviously, but it was bad for white people. It was bad for slave owners because it numbed them. It made, the only way you could be a slave owner was to become numb to the sufferings of others. When Jefferson talks about when Jefferson writes in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal, what does he mean by that? He certainly doesn't mean economic equality. He wasn't a fool. He doesn't mean intellectual equality. He was obviously quite aware of the fact that some people are born smarter than others. When Jefferson says that all men are created equal, he means they are created equal in the moral sense of having a conscience and potential. See that? It is that moral equality that he's talking about, not intellectual or economic, or certainly not strength, physical strength. Okay? So, politics for Jefferson is a chance to exercise it. Jefferson wants to not only permit people to engage in politics, he almost wants to require them to do it. And the way he was going to do that was by his notion of ward republics. The country would be broken up into little wards, townships we might call them today. Jefferson and Madison visit Vermont. God, I would have been on that trip. And Jefferson sees the Vermont town meeting. Have any of you ever attended a Vermont town meeting? It's been called democracy's toughest test. It's incredibly inefficient. Incredibly clumsy, and you have to debate everything, and then you have lunch, and then you go back and debate it again. What good is that town meeting? It instills in the Vermonters the notion that this is my government to run. Jefferson was no fan of representative democracy. He believed in direct participatory democracy, where people are required to make their town budgets, to police their own neighborhoods. Okay? They would have to be small. You obviously can't have a town meeting with 200 million people. Okay? But it was these town meetings which would give them the power to exercise their moral sense. They become more and more committed members of their communities. So, for things that extended beyond towns, then the towns could confederate into states, and the states might confederate for very specific, limited purposes only. Okay? Roads, national defense, which he didn't want that to be very strong either. He reads the Constitution of the United States. He's in France, of course, and he writes to Madison and says, "I am no friend of energetic government."
No friend of what?
Energetic, powerful government. At the national level, at the local level, citizens can do darn near anything they want. Ban newspapers. Jefferson was quite willing. And the most important thing that they can do at the local level is to regulate property. Now, here's the real key to Jefferson, and which ties him into the environment. Okay? Every schoolboy in America, in England, and any place else they speak English had read John Locke and knew that the three great natural rights that every human possessed were life, liberty, and property. Life, liberty, and the state. Private property was an inalienable right that you had. Nothing is more insightful into the philosophy of Thomas Jefferson than when he sits down to write the Declaration of Independence. He writes, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and he won't put down property as an inherent natural right. Instead, he substitutes this strange expression, the pursuit of happiness. But it's not strange, because happiness, for Jefferson, is a social value. See it? You can't be happy by yourself. You can't be happy isolated. So Jefferson, by substituting the pursuit of happiness for property, both distances himself from rights-based liberalism, got that? And connects himself to this civic humanist republican tradition which sees us as community members. Now, Jefferson was no socialist. Jefferson understood that private property had a very, very useful. When you go to Monticello, you'll notice Jefferson was what, the third largest property owner in Virginia at the time? Okay? When you go there, Jefferson believed in property, but it was not a natural right. Property was a convenient social creation. Communities create property. Why? They create property in order to judge and test and measure the moral worth of their citizens. Okay? Jefferson writes at least a couple of places. He writes this long letter to Madison. God, I wonder what Madison would have thought. He writes this long letter to Madison. He says, I want to know to what extent one generation can encumber another generation. And he says, I hold this truth absolute, that the world belongs to the living, that the dead have neither claim nor rights to it. So for all sorts of good social reasons, we give you, or you purchase or whatever, we give you property. In this case, land. But you could extend it to also include plants or industrial facilities or whatever. We give it to you. And then when you die, we probate your will and we say, who do you want to get your property? And you say, I want my kids to have it. Okay? And we asked you this, how did you treat your property when you had it? Were you a good steward of your property? Because you were also the person that educated your kids. If you took care of your property, if you improved it, if you, well, he says, Jefferson's a lawyer, he says, property is something humans hold in usufruct. Usufruct is a fiduciary trust for you Christians in the group. It's the parable of the talents. You're supposed to take it, protect it, and improve it. Okay? If you've improved your property, if you've taken care of it, if you've been a good steward, and you want your kids to have it, fine, we'll pass it on to them. But if you've turned your property into a tire burning facility, a toxic waste dump, if you've destroyed the value of your property, then we're going to take it from you and give it to somebody who will treat it well. Property becomes our test of the moral sense. And who makes that decision? The community does. I think this is a terrific idea. Wouldn't it be nice if every 20 years, well, I'll return to that number, every 20 years, Monsanto, Exxon, let's name them, had to prove they were being good citizens. What have you done? Now, some people, who Karen knows and I happen to live with, build these things into relicensing agreements. You've got to show, Duke Energy has got to show that they are contributing to the public interest. Build more boat ramps. allow canoe trails up and down there. Promote, show, for Jefferson, the essence of human beings. We are not individuals, we are citizens. And the whole function of politics for Jefferson is building giving opportunity for human beings to exercise that civic responsibilities. Jefferson talks about rights, but he also spends a lot of time talking about civic duties, civic responsibilities, what you owe your fellow humans, what you owe your community. But like any good Republican, Jefferson looked at history and was not happy with what he saw. Because the truth of the matter is that if you look at the historical record, communities tend to degenerate. Citizens become numb to each other. They become focused on their own individual self-interests. They seek luxury. And Jefferson had long lists of all the signs of corruption. And he said, from the end of this war, the Revolutionary War, America will be sliding downhill, and our citizens will forget themselves in the pursuit. Oh, damn it, this is worth quoting. I advise you all to read the notes on the state of Virginia before you die. It's fascinating. Darn it. Every government on earth is some trace of human weakness, some germ of corruption and degeneracy. Listen to the language of these issues. Which cunning will discover, and wickedness insensibly open, cultivate, and improve. Every government degenerates when trusted to the rulers of the people alone. And then he says some other place, Americans will become preoccupied with making money and won't care about civic engagements anymore. Won't care about their rights and liberties anymore. And he does everything possible to reverse that. Education reverses it. Civic participation reverses it. Under dire circumstances, the law can reverse it. And his ultimate test is, when are we most virtuous? We're virtuous when we're fighting for each other, when we're fighting for our communities. Jefferson said this, and he meant it. Every 20 years, every law in this country should be wiped off the books. Marriages, property, everything. A revolution every 20 years. Give each new generation that opportunity to create society again. Madison looked at this in utter horror. The guy's a crackpot. He's dangerous. There's a little bit of Jefferson legacy of many laws passed now have sunset provisions. After 15, 20 years, this law either gets renewed, right? I mean, just because the laws are wiped off, honey, you and I are, after 20 years, are no longer married. What do you want to do? Well, let's renew our vows. I think that'd be a great idea. Let's renew our vows. Let's see how people have been treating their land. Wouldn't it be great if farmers or industrial people or average citizens every 20 years had to say, how you doing? Show us. It was that revolution that would rekindle and respark civic virtue in America. Well, that's Jefferson. Probably no one. I mean, driving over, I was thinking, if you could recall a couple lectures ago, I was talking about the consensus historians in the 1950s that argued that the Constitution was this huge consensus during the period, and everyone agreed and saw things the same. What books were they reading? The founding fathers were at each other's throats over the future of America. Jefferson's dream is a dream of small communities that expands over time. He wasn't sure whether the president had the authority to purchase Louisiana, but damn it, he went ahead and did it anyway, so that America would always have a place for these small farmers to go. Because if you weren't small farmers, my God, you might move into cities. And in the cities, you're going to be driven by that marketplace, which is basically, we call them the caprices of the buyers and sellers, people grubbing for money. One of my favorite lines, Jefferson says, "The mobs of great cities contribute just so much to the support of pure government as sores do to the health of the human body." He also said, "State a moral principle to a plowman and a professor, a farmer and a professor." He said, the farmer will answer it better because he has not been led astray by false principles. This is those who labor in the earth, this is the American agrarian tradition, all right? Those who labor in the earth are the chosen people of God, if ever he had a chosen people. You cannot understand American farm policy unless you understand the farmers consider themselves the chosen people of God. And that they view city folk as corrupt money grubs. Okay? So this is the American agrarian tradition. This is Jefferson. This is the moral sense. And nothing could be more farther from the truth, farther from Jefferson than the political thought of Alexander Hamilton. Jefferson and Madison were certainly no dummies. But when it came to pure, raw intelligence, Alexander Hamilton would have gotten the highest SATs in his class. He was the illegitimate son, of course, came to America, worked his way up. He's the American archetypical self-made man. But where Jefferson looked for citizens, where Jefferson looked to the west for us to develop in space, further expanding out, Hamilton wanted us to develop in time, to go from hunting and gathering to agriculture, from agriculture to primitive industry, rough industry to rough industry to advanced industry, from advanced industry to advanced technological society. That's how Hamilton viewed it. Hamilton wants America to become a massive industrial power. One of the tremendous things, in 1790, England and Spain almost went to war over their possessions in North America. President Washington asked his cabinet for opinions on whether or not we should let the British come down the Mississippi River and attack New Orleans and Florida. Hamilton wrote a report. The attack never came off, so the report isn't all that important, except there's one moment. Remember, Hamilton is a colonel in the Army, okay? Hamilton is used to viewing his positions as being either left or right. You're left wing, you're right wing of your army. He writes to Washington and just casually drops it and says, Florida is on our right. Canada is on our left. Florida is on our right. Canada is on our left. Jefferson spent his whole life looking westward, looking to the Louisiana Purchase, looking to the, quote, vacant lands where Americans could expand. But I ask you, if Hamilton thinks Florida's on our right and Canada's on our left, which way is Hamilton looking? East. Hamilton is looking back towards Europe. Hamilton is looking to those countries that treat us with condescension, that don't respect us. And by God, he was going to fix that. He was going to teach our imposing brethren some moderation. America was going to become a great military power. Jefferson's legacy lives on, I think, in this notion that we can become moral, active citizens. Hamilton's legacy is much more appropriate. If you ask Americans, what do you think of the American Constitution? What are they going to say? It's the greatest document in the history of the world. Right? And you ask them, what makes you say that? And what will the response be? One of the responses will be, we are the most powerful nation on earth. We have an economy. We have a military that is, I mean, some countries love us, some countries fear us. Nobody ignores America. That's Hamilton's legacy. The problem for Hamilton was that Americans were quite content to be little self-sufficient farmers on their 40 acres of a piece of land. Hamilton wants, can I have a cloth or something like this? Hamilton wants humans to move up. He wants progress. And progress for Hamilton means moving from simple hunting and gathering societies, thank you, again, to agriculture, to his form of industrialization. He saw the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, to more and more advanced. Here's the problem. This is where Hamilton is not a Lockean liberal. This does not happen through consent. Human beings do not want to improve. They are quite content to live as they live. If human society have improved, it's because humans have been forced to improve. Madison says of the Native Americans, they don't want to become agriculturists. They're happy living as hunters and gatherers. If we want to civilize the Indians, we're going to have to force them into it. Hamilton took that same reason. If you want these hick farmers out in North Carolina to become industrial workers in New Jersey, you're going to have to force them. Which leads us to one of the most crucial concepts in Alexander Hamilton. He absolutely despised human beings. and in particular, he hated Americans. Listen to these quotations. Our countrymen have all, these are direct Hamilton quotations. Our countrymen have all the folly of the ass and all the passiveness of the sheep in their composition. They are determined not to be free and can be neither frightened, discouraged, nor persuaded to change their resolution. He was at a dinner one time, and this one Republican speaker was talking and saying how much he admired the American people and how the people's government was going. Hamilton slammed his fist into the table and said, "Your people, sir, your people is a great beast." Experience, another quotation, experience is a continual comment on the worthlessness of the human race. I know few men estimable, few amiable. There is, another quote, there is no virtue in America. There's no civic virtue in America. That commerce which presided over our birth and education in these states has fitted their inhabitants for the chain, and the only condition they sincerely desire is that it be made a golden one. Golden one. Human beings are quite willing to live in chains as long as they can have nice cars, nice house, plenty of furniture. Okay? He's quoting, of course, he's paraphrasing Defoe. I think it's Defoe. A fool I do him firmly hold, who loves his chains, though they were made of gold. But it is this opinion, and the worst thing about Americans is that they're passive, they're lazy, they're unambitious. They don't want, I mean, how many Americans wake up every morning and say, I want to help make the United States of America a great, powerful nation? There are a few. There are a few, and there's a one little pocket of virtue in America, the military. It is the military where people really sacrifice for the common good. It is the military where they have some notion, a strong sense of community. That's how you build an army. I mean, Hamilton's worship of George Washington, his deep experiences during the Revolution, where he had an outstanding war record. That painting of the charge and assault on the final British bastion at Yorktown, and the officer up on the ramparts with his sword calling, that's Hamilton. Hamilton led the final assault at the Battle of Yorktown. Very personally brave, that has led another aside. It has led many people to believe that in a shootout, Aaron Burr could never beat me. And that Hamilton committed semi-suicide. How to get people to move, how to get America to become an industrial country. How to provide a carrot and a stick. First of all, you've got to, and it's exactly how you would train an animal. Okay? You have a military there that says, look, if you act up, we're going to kill you. Okay? The Whiskey Rebellion, I mean, they were, you know, a few guys refusing to pay their taxes on their liquor. What did they do? 15,000 soldiers they organized to march on Western Pennsylvania. This group of Pennsylvania Dutch couldn't even speak English. Came up with this notion that King George was going to marry his sister to somebody in American creed, and they decided that they were going to protest this. Hamilton wanted to round up and hang every one of them. Keep the people in awe. Keep them scared to death of the military force. That's the stick. The carrot is the financial system. And this is Hamilton's absolute genius and his real contribution. Alexander Hamilton invented the American financial system. Okay? And he did it, well, he had some help. Walpole, Hugh, but here's the key. Here's the key to understanding Hamilton's financial system. In Britain, the sole purpose of the financial system is to raise revenue for the government. Understand? The first purpose of taxes is to raise money. Okay? Hamilton's scheme is partially to raise money, but more importantly, to control and direct human behavior. Okay? Hamilton's scheme is behavior modification on a national level. He saw the American Constitution as the great opportunity for that. His role in the Constitutional Convention is interesting. Nobody did more to promote the Constitutional Convention than Alexander Hamilton, including James Madison. Nobody did more to get the Constitution ratified than Alexander Hamilton. And yet, during the actual convention itself, he was hardly there. He left town like June 17th and didn't come back until September. He was completely disinterested. He wanted three things. He wanted a necessary and proper clause by which the government could greatly expand its powers anytime it wanted. He wanted a powerful executive president. He wanted a court that could overturn state laws. And he wanted a supremacy clause that made sure that if anything that happened in the states contradicted what happened in the federal government would always win. After that, elections, terms of office, he doesn't carry on there. Okay? He thought, probably, I don't have the evidence, but he thought that under the American system, the president would be the chief of state. Ceremonial. They asked Washington, what should we call you? Should we call you Your Majesty? Should we call you Your Excellency? And and Washington, I'll get this right, Washington, to his undying credit, turned to them and said, you may call me Mr. President. And from that day to this, we refer to the president as Mr. President. In Britain, the king is chief executive, and the chief of state, and the prime minister is chief executive. The prime minister in England comes out of the Treasury Department, out of the Chancellery Exchequer. So Hamilton assumed Washington was going to be chief of state, ceremonial, and the Secretary of Treasury, i.e. him, was going to run the country. Washington, interestingly, quickly dissuaded him of that and said, no, when you fill out these reports, you submit them to me for review. Hamilton's financial scheme. How to make it work. First, you must greatly increase the power of the federal government by increasing, of all things, the debt of the federal government. Now remember, when the Revolutionary War ended, the federal government and the states were they were worse debt than we are today. You could take every dollar, every coin in the United States and totally confiscate it, and there would not have been enough money to pay off the national debt. Okay? So, interestingly enough, the first thing he did was to assume the debts of the states. Now, the states, of course, had a solution for this. They simply printed more money, which resulted, not to anyone's surprise, in the money being virtually worthless. So Hamilton's job is he had to increase the money supply, dramatically increase the money supply. And how you increase the money supply? You increase the money supply by increasing the debt, and then you use the debt to issue bonds to pay off the debt, or to pay it down. And in fact, just absolutely brilliant for those who, Hamilton takes debt and moves it from the liability side of the ledger to the asset side of the ledger. And boom, like that, he creates $30 million in credit that the United States has. They assume the debt, okay? Then, the key to it all, you create a national bank. Okay? Federal Reserve of his time. That bank the Treasury Department issues bonds. The bank can engage in selling them. The people buy the bonds. Now, once these people buy bonds, okay, then they're indebted to the federal government. And so, Hamilton loved the military. He viewed capitalists and financiers. Remember, he spent his whole life in New York City, down where that section where the old fortress used to be, and they called it Wall Street. And he was interested in this emerging notion of commercial society capitalism. So you sell the bonds to the people, right? Then they take the bonds, because you issue them in such large denominations, you can't pull into a gas station and buy a tank of gas with a $500 U.S. Treasury bond. What do you do with the Treasury bond? You take it to the bank, you deposit it, and you use it as collateral to borrow money. See it? That puts vast amounts of money in people's pockets, but the money now has value because it's backed with something. It's backed by the bonds, and the bonds are backed by, quote, the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. Okay? Then you take that money, put it in private hands, and then you get to tax it. You fund the debt. How much taxes are the American public willing to put up with? Hamilton studies Great Britain. He says they got about 40 million pounds circulating in the economy. They tax about 10 million pounds a year. The British people can put up with about 25% tax rate. So that's what he says. He says, it's not a fixed number. It can fluctuate. He says, find out how much money the government needs, put 4 times that amount into circulation, see it? And then tax 25% of it. You want more money? You want more government? And then use that money to help industries? Hamilton was no friend of what we call laissez-faire government. He wanted a very active government. He was going to spur industrial production. He was going to give tax breaks. He had one plan. Where he sent agents over to England to recruit. This was against the law for skilled technicians to leave. But he would go over there and recruit them and pay their trips to America. He gets involved in this scheme to open up a city devoted to nothing but industry in northern New Jersey. And he decides to name it after the governor of New Jersey, who at the time was named Patterson. So the funded debt, the bank, the assumption, and the funded debt. All right? You understand this? The key to it all is debt. Debt is going to be the spur to human behavior. A national debt, he says, if it's not excessive, is a national blessing. I ask my students, my seniors, I said, so what are you going to do when you graduate? You're going to hike the Appalachian Trail, learn to play guitar, travel the world. What's their answer? No, I got to get a job. Why? I'm up to my ears in debt. I'll never forget walking into a classroom at Colorado State. They did not do this at Warren Wilson. But at Colorado State University, there was a little pocket thing on the wall, public announcements. Students, get your own credit card. No parent signatures necessary. No job necessary. I looked at that and I thought, Alexander Hamilton would be so happy. So Judy and I went into Bank of America. We had a little pontoon. We said, we want to get a home equity line of credit. They came and checked out our house. And they said, how much do you want to borrow? And I said, $6,500. I swear this is true. They said, we'll give you $15,000. I said, I don't want $15,000. I want $6,500 to buy this little boat. The woman looked at me and said, get a bigger boat.
Is that bank still around?
Oh yeah, yes, of course they are. What happens to those kids that get the free credit cards?
Parents bail them out.
Their parents bail them out, or the bank declares them in default and takes it off their taxes. Yes? This is the way this debt is going to be how we control Americans. Any American. It's interesting. Part of Hamilton believes this. Part of Hamilton believes that Americans would really, if they could have, they have a little farm in Madison County, in Grove, Ginseng, whatever. Right? Nobody in their right mind wants to work in a coal mine, or in an industrial plant, or in a sweatshop in Massachusetts. Why do they go to work there? Because they got to have money. See this? Money becomes the driving force. Hamilton was very, very unhappy when Jefferson purchases Louisiana. Why? He doesn't want America to expand west. He wants America to expand industrially. Okay? He wants, given a choice between New Jersey, which is always mine. Given a choice, what would you rather be? A farmer in Oregon or an assembly line worker in New Jersey? Answer? Oregon. Well, why? How can they get people to staff the assembly lines in New Jersey? Answer? Get them in debt. Now, Hamilton's next big problem. Suppose that people don't want to be in debt. Suppose they want to live a frugal, simple lifestyle. He's got another answer for that. You must spur, and the word he uses, you must spur their vanity. He's an avid reader of Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations. Adam Smith says, I love this, it's almost poetic. To what purpose is all the toil and bustle of this world? Why do we work our asses off? What is the end of avarice and ambition, the pursuit of wealth, of power, and preeminence? It's not to satisfy our needs. We can satisfy our needs with 2 or 3 days of work. The average laborer, he says, is it to supply the necessities of nature? The wages of the meanest laborer can supply them. We see that they afford him food and clothing, the comfort of a house and of a family. If we examine his economy with rigor, we should find that he spends a great part of them upon conveniences, which may be regarded as superfluities, and that upon extraordinary occasions, he can give something to vanity and distinction. What are the advantages we propose to that great purpose of human life, which we call bettering our condition? To be observed, to be attended to be taken notice with sympathy, complacency, and approbation are all the advantages we can propose to derive from it. It is the vanity, not the ease or the pleasure, which interests us. Humans are social creatures. We do want each other's company. We do want to be loved. What you got to do is you got to convince them, if only you had a new car. If only your house was a little bit bigger. Look at you. I tell my students, you want to get rich? This is how you do it. Make Americans hate themselves and then sell them something to overcome it. Look at the commercials. You're ugly, you got pimples. Nobody likes you. But if you buy a tube of this, or if you buy this new suit, the women will be clawing at you. Doesn't work out right. Take that natural desire of humans to want to be in each other's company, to be loved, and convert it into the ability to buy things. In if you need more evidence, the strongest and most active passion of the human heart, vanity. Even things in themselves not positively advantageous sometimes become so by their tendency to evoke exertion. Every new scene which is open to the busy nature of man to rouse himself and exert itself is the addition of new energy to the general stock. Where's this wonderful quotation from this is great. We labor less now than any civilized nation of Europe, and a habit of labor in the people is as essential to the health and vigor of their minds and bodies as it is conducive to the welfare of the state. I can't find that, sorry. The British trade ambassador comes to America and has negotiations with Hamilton over trade policy. Hamilton says to him, boy, you ought to quote America. And he says, American will become a great nation of consumers. And I said, Jesus, this is like 1790. Was that the first time? And so I went to the Oxford English Dictionary and checked. No, it was used once before, twice before, but by 1790, the earliest use of that word in America is by Alexander Hamilton, who now describes Americans not as citizens, not even as people. We are consumers. We are a consumer society. It's like the whole purpose of being a human being is to turn nature into consumable products and consumable products into garbage. We have consumer protection agreements. I hate that. We need to eliminate the whole thing. And then, what is the price to be paid for all of this? Thus men become acquainted with the pleasures of luxury and the profits of commerce. It arouses men from their indolence, and presenting the gayer and more opulent part of the nation with the objects of luxury, which they never before dreamed of, raises in them a desire of a more splendid way of life than what their ancestors enjoyed. They flock into cities, love to receive and communicate knowledge, to show their wit or their bringing, their taste in conversation, or their living in clothes or in furniture. Curiosity allures the wise, vanity the foolish, and pleasure both. So we are going to become a great economic growth engine, done by the financial system, the banks, and guided by the federal government. The key to it all is to keep Americans borrowing to spend. Okay? The upshot of it all was Hamilton, from his report on manufacturers, Hamilton could be incredibly candid, I mean, honest. It merits particular observation that the multiplication of manufactories not only furnishes a market for those articles which have been accustomed to be produced in abundance in the country, but it likewise creates a demand for such as were either unknown or produced in inconsiderable quantities. Listen to this. The bowels as well as the surface of the earth are ransacked for articles which were before neglected.
Oh my God. This is getting terrible.
What would Hamilton say about fracking? What would Hamilton say about iPhones? That when I was 20, I had no idea that I had to have one. Just keep feeding him, feeding him,
He
feeding.
was so ahead of his time.
Oh God!
Certainly was.
Gee, and the brilliance is this: once you set it in motion, it's impossible to take it apart. Because once you take it apart, if you tried to stop it, you run the country, it would be national economic collapse.
It's like the original pyramid scheme.
It
In
is.
in those days, they weren't called pyramid schemes, Karen, they were called tontines, which was their form of a pyramid scheme, yeah. Hamilton, in New York, hung out at a local restaurant, pub, you know what it's called? The Tontine Club. There's a difference. Pyramid schemes eventually collapse. Right? The federal government goes on forever. All right?
Print more paper. Issue more
The American financial scheme, the American financial system is a massive pyramid scheme. All right?
But what's scary about all this is
It works! It's so brilliant!
And Hamilton won.
Oh, Hamilton, yes. Jefferson won the debate. We give out the 4th of July, you know, we give speeches, we talk about equality and community, right? And then we shout till we drop. Hamilton, one of my best ones, Hamilton invents the rat race.
Invents the rat race.
Okay. Federal government, no limits. Federalist number 85, he begs Congress not to put a Bill of Rights on this. Why not? Bill of Rights is a restriction on the acts of the government. And he says in Federalist 36, I acknowledge my aversion to every project that is calculated to disarm the government of a single weapon which in any possible contingency might be usefully employed for the general defense and security. What does Hamilton think of waterboarding?
Loves
Get
it.
it. Okay? If necessity requires it, the president can do it. And who decides if necessity requires it?
He does.
The president does. He wants a very broad construction. I mean, when these Tea Partiers say, well, our country was built on the strict construction of the Constitution, it all depends who you're talking about. Hamilton's a founding father, too. And his attitude is, if the Constitution says we can't do it, unless the Constitution says we can't do it, then we can't. Does the Constitution say we can't form a bank? No. Then we can. Okay? That's it. I was on sabbatical. And I had the collected works of, I was in the habit of just reading it. And economics is not my major. Finance, I'm just going through. And then all of a sudden it just snaps. It's like, oh God, this guy was so brilliant. Jefferson, TJ. TJ trusts the masses. They could be educated and have civic virtue. He distrusts the elites. Okay. Hamilton distrusts the masses, their asses. Right? And he trusts the elites. He trusts the financial elites a little bit and trusts the military elites a little. The way you understand James Madison, James Madison combines Hamilton's distrust of the masses with Jefferson's distrust of the elites. Right? Hamilton doesn't trust anybody. That's Madison, excuse me, Madison. He's been called the nation's great pragmatist. Well, if by pragmatism you mean that you don't trust anybody, okay, then that's it. Then that's it. The masses are driven by passion. This is Madison. You switched, Freddie. This is Madison's Hamiltonians. Once again. Next time, Gordon's. Madison, right, distrusts the American masses. They're driven by passion. They're driven by interest. And what's worse, they may have a little virtue if they, on their own. But when they form groups, what he calls factions, what we would today call interest groups, all they do is incite each other's passions. I really like this, don't you? I really think we should do this, don't you? Let's go. That bastard over there trying to stop us. We gotta do something. We gotta organize. It's interest groups, factions incite the human passions, incite the human emotions. One of the greatest lines in one sense, is from the Federalist 55. Madison says, if every Athenian citizen had been a Socrates, every Athenian assembly would still have been a mob.
Would still be a mom.
Yeah. Raci or archy, at the end of a word, means rule by. Okay? So rule by theologians is a theocracy. See it? Rule by one person is a monarchy. Okay? Rule by the demos is democracy. What is the translation of demos? Don't say people. All right? Because people is a republic. In Greek, the word demos it roughly translates as mob. Okay? So for Madison and for many of the founders, democracy was mob rule. And of particular importance, because the people are going to have a say, the group that he feared the most, Madison, was the majority. Because the majority had their passions and they had the power to oppress. Madison's rule is very simple. He says, give all power to the few, they will oppress the many. Give all power to the many, they will oppress the few. And if you don't think the majority will oppress, maybe we want to ask some African Americans about that. Or some women. Or to any other minority group. So the first thing Madison has to do is to control the majority. Have majority support, but don't let the majority control. And he does this in Federalist number 10, which is brilliant. He does it by redefining what we mean by a republic. Jefferson's definition of a republic was simple. A republic was virtuous citizens directly running their lives. Participatory democracy. In Federalist number 10, Madison says, by a republic, I mean, which is interesting because he indicates that other people don't, I mean a system of government with a scheme of representation. Don't let the American public debate policy. Don't let them formulate laws. Your job is to go to the polls and then go home. Your representatives, who we hope might be a little smarter, a little better, they will discuss it. And in the process of doing that, maybe you can calm down a little bit. No sooner does he say that, he says, but then the representatives might be corrupt. Might by the vicious arts by which elections are too often carried. First gain the suffrage and then betray the trust of the people. He says in Vices of the Political System, he says, political office is sought for one of three reasons: public good, personal ambition, not a nice one. He says,
Exercise corruption.
yeah, something like that. He says, all experience shows that the latter two are private interest. Public office is sought for three reasons: public interest, private interest, or personal ambition. He says, all history proves that the latter two reasons predominate. Now, if you ask Barack Obama or Mitt Romney or Mark Meadows or anybody, why are you running for public office, what are they going to say? To do good and take care of the public. Okay? Don't trust them. Don't trust them. Okay? Well, if we can't trust our elected representatives, then what? Then Madison really hits it. He said, his second cure, and this is the biggest one, make the country so big that a majority can't form. Pluralism. This is important because remember the debate over the Constitution anti-federalists were arguing America's too big to be a republic. Republics have to be small. They have to be compact. They have to be homogeneous. And this Constitution creates one government over 13 colonies? Won't work. That was the argument. It was effective. Madison was trying something that had never been done before, popular government on a large scale. What he does is take that size argument and turn it around. Make the country big enough, and the people will just naturally fragment into little groups. A majority won't form, or if it does form, won't be able to get together. Pluralism is the check on majority rule. See it? So it's just this scale of the country that's going to save us. But then in Federalist number 51, he says, that's going to protect us from the masses. What's going to protect us from the government? And the answer is the same thing. Fragment the government. Pit them against each other. Make it possible for a minority to block the majority every chance they get.
There's another word for that, stalemate.
Stalemate, gridlock, paralysis.
Yeah.
If James Madison came back and you said to him, Congress can't get anything done. The House is fighting with the the Congress is fighting with the President, the Supreme Court's nullifying all, the states are fighting with the feds, nothing is getting done. Madison's response would be, it's working. It's working. The only time anything can get done is in a dire national emergency where the power shifts to the president, that's Hamilton, or the strange notion we have in America called bipartisanship. I mean, you don't hear England talk about bipartisanship. You got the majority and you got the minority. It's the minority's job to fight the majority. But the only way anything can get done in this country is for everybody together, because it's so easy for any group to say no. The House can block it, the Senate can block it, the President can block it, the Supreme Court can block it, the states can block it. It is a massive, massive system. What we call separation of powers is really fragmentation. What we call checks and balances is merely political gridlock. Madison makes it clear why he does this. The great line from Federalist 51, ambition must be made to counteract ambition. The interests of the man must be connected with the constitutional rights of the place. It may be a reflection on human nature that such devices should be necessary to control the abuses of government. But what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? Listen to this. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. That's his response to Jefferson. If we were all civic virtuous citizens, we wouldn't need government. Jefferson would say, yeah, you're right. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. That's his problem with Hamilton. Jefferson is a idealistic dreamer. Hamilton is a tyrant in waiting. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. So, Madison wants everything possible to check the government, a Bill of Rights. Take the weaker branch, House of Representatives, or the weaker branch, the courts, elect them for life. Don't elect him at all. No contact with the public. President, he was willing to have a life term. Life. They settled for 4-year terms. Senate, which were going to be the aristocrats, 6 years. House of Representatives, oh God, they're too close to the people. Make them run every 2 years. Okay? Strictly interpret the Constitution. If it says you can't do it, you can't. And what makes the system go? What makes the system go is continuous economic growth. How long will this system last? What he wants Americans to be is that he wants them to be private people. Don't get involved in politics. If you told James Madison only 50% of eligible voters vote in elections, he would say, well, what are they doing? Are they out in the streets protesting? Are they forming revolutions? He said, no, they're home watching World Federation Wrestling. Well, okay. Okay, you don't have to participate. In fact, it might be better if you don't. Okay? Focus on your private life. Take care of yourself. And if things are rough, well, get a job. This will keep on going as long as the country can expand. And in 1807, 1808, I think it's fascinating. Madison considers the question, how long will it be before the country fills up? Jefferson's dream is no longer available. Hamilton's dream, we become packed in like sardines, and all us working for giant corporations takes over. And the Constitution no longer works. He gets out a pencil, starts to calculate. Well, let's see, the population, Madison's read Malthus and believes it. Population is growing pretty fast, much faster than Europe. Lewis and Clark come back from Europe, come back from the West Coast. How big is this country? It's really big. Parts of it are desert, mountains, but there's plenty of room for expansion. They're a big country. Madison does the calculation and decides the American Constitution can last, 1807, can last until 1929.
Oh.
He says at that point, you're going to have to redesign it. And a lot of people say that's exactly what Franklin Roosevelt did. I want to end with leaving you with this thought, or leaving you with this question. That was 200 years ago. I'm not asking you to go back ahead 200 years ago. Go ahead 100 years from now. Okay? My father died 6 months before his 101st birthday. People, you can look. What's America going to be like in 2113? Is it going to be Jefferson's dream of small, simple living, frugal society? Is it going to be Hamilton's dream of a great, powerful nation with a government that manages smart growth that goes on forever and ever? Or is it going to be Madison's dream of gridlock where the only change that occur are small, incremental, little things that really don't affect very much? What do you think? Where are we at? I tell you, I pray to God Hamilton's wrong. Because if he is, then we're going to destroy this environment. The bowels and the surface of the earth will be ransacked. He understood it, and everyone in this room understands it. The only way you can keep these growth rates going is ransack it. Jefferson, there's parts of me that are strange, but I hope we do become a nation of small, self-sufficient, active citizens who live a life. Now, we're not talking about going back to the cave, but restrict their consumption somewhat, and see themselves not as consumers, but as citizens. One thing I'm pretty sure of: James Madison was right and he said, this Constitution is not gonna last forever. This Constitution, we can't live with this gridlock and paralysis. Washington, I don't know anybody that doesn't agree Washington is dysfunctional. It just doesn't work. And electing Democrats or electing all Republicans isn't going to solve it. Because I'll tell you, John Boehner would be opposed to the president if the president was a Republican. Why? Because John Boehner's an ambitious man. That's how he got the job. Harry Reid is ambitious. And Madison has set up a system to throw those people up against each other. And God bless them, it works. God don't bless them. Boy, I love this stuff. I got 2 young puppies. And they wake me at 5 o'clock in the morning. And I'll tell you, there's times when I get frustrated. But every morning as the sun is coming up, for the past 2 weeks, I've sat on my back patio, giving my toes nibble, and reading the Federalist Papers, and reading Thomas Jefferson yet again. And you people were the spur. I read the Federalist Papers every 2 or 3 years, whether I want to or not. We're the spur to doing it. I want to thank you. So if you want to talk about how much sexual
Frank, we'll take a couple of questions, I think.
yeah.
Hamilton sexual?
Hamilton sexual.
I still like the story of Martha Washington's tomcat. She was a witness. He had 7 kids. He had, let's put it this way, an exceptionally close relationship with the Marquis de Lafayette and John Lawrence when he was in the military. Some have suggested that he was bisexual. Okay. In either case, he was definitely sexual. There was a lady called Mrs. Reynolds. And Mrs. Reynolds needed to borrow some money, and Hamilton thought she was down and out, so he went and lent her some money. He comes back to collect it. And she lets him suggest that, how do you put it, other than pecuniary considerations would be accepted. So Mrs. Reynolds and Hamilton start this sex affair. It gets more complicated. Turns out Mr. Reynolds knows about it.
Oh.
Okay? Mr. Reynolds approaches Hamilton and says, I need a job in the government. And if I don't get one, I might have to go to the newspaper. Hamilton, so basically, is under extortion by this. I think it's fair to say that the Reynolds family was not the paragon of virtue. That goes on. The fight at Weehawken Cliffs, all right, was precipitated, according to some, by Hamilton's suggestion that Burr was engaged in a sexual relationship with Burr's daughter, with his own daughter. In those days, these two, that was cause for a showdown. But Burr and Hamilton hated each other all the way back from their military time together.
So if Hamilton hated Americans, and so it's almost as though he set up this system to watch us sort of like cannibalize ourselves.
Okay? He set up the system to use debt to drive use vanity to spur debt. I won't do it in this room. I know the answer, but I used to ask my college seniors, how many of you are in debt? Right? I'm an example. I go to BOFA and take out a home equity loan to buy a pontoon. Do I need a pontoon?
Yeah, sure you do.
Well,
You don't need the bigger one, you just need the little one.
yeah. This is what we mean when we talk about the American way of life.
Well, you could build one.
Consuming, and
You know, he said,
If Hamilton didn't like the expansion, but he did like debt, what was his attitude toward the Louisiana Purchase that cost, what, $15 million,
Yeah.
something like that?
Yeah,
Which we had to borrow to
Yeah.
get?
But he didn't mind that. He didn't mind where the money came from. He also didn't mind the fact. What he wanted was the purchase of New Orleans. I mean, that was critical. Because without New Orleans, I mean, Jefferson said, there's one spot on this earth that we will go to war for, and that's the city of New Orleans.
That's because of the port?
That's because of the port, and it's the terminus of the Mississippi River. All right? So Jefferson sends Monroe, Pinckney, and somebody else over to France to negotiate with Napoleon the purchase of New Orleans. That's all they want to do. All right? Napoleon is no fool. Napoleon can see that Americans are streaming across the Mississippi, in droves every year, and then he's going to lose Louisiana. He's going to lose Louisiana anyway. So why not sell what you're going to lose anyway? So Monroe and Pinckney can write back to Jefferson. Napoleon doesn't want to sell us New Orleans. He wants to sell us all of the Louisiana, anything that drains into the Missouri River. For 15 minutes, cheap. Hamilton didn't have any qualms about the money. He also didn't have any qualms about whether or not the president could do it, because he was in favor of broad. What he was worried about was those Americans streaming across the Mississippi and becoming agricultural settlers out west. That he didn't want.
you mentioned the three reasons that people run for office.
Yeah.
Public interest,
Private interest,
Private interest.
or personal ambition.
or personal ambition.
Those are Madison's three reasons.
But isn't private interest the same as personal ambition?
No, private interest, according to Madison would say, private interest means you're going to get money, you're going to get some material advantage. Lyndon Johnson was elected to Congress as a poor school teacher. When he left Washington, he was a multi-millionaire. He didn't do that on salary. Okay. Personal ambition is what drives people who are already richer than anybody can want.
Ego, in other words, kind of.
Yeah, maybe fair.
Something to do.
Well, Hamilton talks about fame as the driving passion of the noblest minds. Now, when he says fame, he doesn't mean popularity. He's not talking about rock stars. He's talking about people who become historic figures, who have towns named after them, who have is there a county? Yeah, Delaware. Is there a state in the United States that doesn't have a Jefferson County? What's interesting is, with the exception of a statue at Hamilton College in Clinton, New York, I don't know of another statue of Alexander Hamilton in this country.
Well, he was never president.
He couldn't be. He wasn't. He was ineligible. He was John Adams called him that bastard brat of a Scott peddler.
Who called him that?
John Adams.
Yeah.
This is what he was.
Was he?
Where was he born?
Yeah, where was that?
Nevis.
Nevis.
Nevis in the Virgin Islands.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
And any idea about his parentage?
A friend of mine, Jerry Conti, was nice enough. He went down to Nevis and urinated on Hamilton's birthplace. Yes, his mother was, depending upon how sympathetic you are, a very poor woman in Nevis. If you're less sympathetic, she was a prostitute. All right. His father was this Scottish trader that came along and showed up in Nevis one day, and Father Alexander Hamilton had his contempt for human beings can be understood. His contempt for slavery Hamilton hated slavery because he saw it in its. I mean, slaves in South Carolina were living in the lap of luxury compared to the slaves in Hispaniola and in those cane fields
Was his mother an octoroon?
We don't know. We don't know.
I
He
think
was very dark skinned,
Right.
and there have been those that suggest it. Of course, I mean Hamilton, of course, was absolutely hated during his life. Well, loved it as my son. We loved it.
Adams would love it.
Oh no. But Adams needed a personality transplant.
Professor, you have primed this audience with your comments.
Yeah.
I asked Karen if I could
Oh, please.
speak to them after you have done such a masterful job. I'm with Move to Amend, as you can see from my T-shirt. And the professor's talked about the Constitution. And one thing he said reminded me of what some corporation CEO said, that if the Constitution doesn't say that we can't throw garbage on your porch, then we can do it.
Right.
He mentioned the small towns in Vermont and how those people get together. Well, just a few years ago, Monsanto was selling to the dairies a drug to dairy farmers to inject in their cows to produce more milk. And the people in Vermont got tired of it, and they wrote their congressman or their state legislature and that sort of thing. And they kept going and going and couldn't do anything about it. And finally they got enough pressure built up on the legislature to get them to write a law that says what they wanted was a label on milk products. And and the lawyers for Monsanto went in there and said, you can't do that. We have the right of speech. And this is where it's really crazy. We have the right to not speak. In other words, if we don't want that on the label, then you can't have it. And they won that case.
So what do you want?
Pardon?
What do you want from us?
I'm with Move to Amend, and the move, because we can't change the politicians. They've already been bought and paid for. The only way we can do it is just an example like that. Steve.
I'll sign it.
Just an example like that. There's a pin on there. Just an example like that. The people wanted that, and they were able to force the legislature to do that. And Monsanto was able to come in with their attorneys and say you can't do that.
What does your petition propose?
Right.
It proposes a constitutional amendment that says corporations are not people.
Whoa. I don't want that.
And money is not speech. And it's
I don't know how you can do that. I don't know how you can do that. I mean, as long as this country has existed, what does it mean to say a corporation is a person? It means that they have standing in court. Now, mountains aren't people. You can't sue them. I want to be able to sue Monsanto. If you deny Monsanto, if you pass this amendment, then you can't sue Monsanto. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
that's fine.
Well, the Constitution can only be changed in two ways. Which way are you proposing to do it?
Either way.
Nobody wants a constitutional convention. Period.
Well, you're
I would like to see it,
absolutely right. The few times that there have been an uprising that says we want to change the Constitution, when it built
If
up.
it can get Congress to pass it, if it can get Congress to pass it, I'd be for it, but I
Well,
don't want a constitutional.
I just want to answer
convention.
your comment to everybody else.
Okay.
The few times that people have built up enough power to change the Constitution, Congress says, okay, we'll do it. So that part has never been done, but it hadn't been done because the Congress would finally step in.
So you don't want corporations to have standing in court?
I don't know.
Or that's what it means to say, that's what it means to say they're
That's
people.
not what he's saying.
Firmly established that money is not speech and that human beings.
But money
not-
is speech.
Not corporations are persons entitled to constitutional rights.
Professor,
I'm sorry, you're right.
They want to nullify the Citizens United.
Yes, yes, and I think we had that discussion.
Yes.
I mean, Citizens United is a very bad decision.
Yes.
But the two principles upon which it rests, the corporations have standing, and that money is speech, are well established.
But corporations don't cry, or they don't give birth,
They have it's a bad choice of words to call it people, but what it means is they have standing in court. They can sue, they can be sued, they can hire lawyers, they have rights.
I'd like everybody to have a chance to.
Sure, absolutely. I'm sorry.
To sign the petition.
Denies constitutional.
I want to take it.
Rights of people to corporations. Corporations shouldn't have all the rights.
That's where you and I had that discussion.
Yeah.
Just because you have rights doesn't mean you have all the rights.
Yes.
You can give them procedural rights,
Yes.
but not substantive rights. You can say you can hire lawyers, but you can't talk.
I want to thank Frank
Sorry.
and give him a round of applause. I think it was.
Can I apologize to you. Let me say one thing. The next talk, the last talk, we take the Constitution and we bring it up to date. What's happened to the Constitution since the founding? And we're going to focus on another three giants: Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln, and Theodore Roosevelt.
It's the 28th of June. It's I think it's the third or last Friday of the month. And with our Salon series, we'll continue this in the fall with another group of topics, and really appreciate you coming. And this is something we just love to do, and really, Frank, can't thank you enough. This is.
I enjoy it. I'm losing sleep.
I think Frank will stay for a few minutes and answer
Sure,
any questions
absolutely.
if you want. So.
The professor said, before you die, read the Federalist papers.